We have breaking news tonight indicating that while many reporters and pundits recently have been speculating that the Mueller investigation is close to an end, there is much more to the investigation than any of us can know, including this new report in the Daily Beast tonight with the lead, quote, "The special counsel's office and federal prosecutors in Manhattan are scrutinizing a meeting involving former House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes, one-time National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, and dozens of foreign officials, according to 3 sources familiar with the investigations. The investigation is about a breakfast event at the Trump Hotel in Washington 2 days before the Trump inauguration. The event came to the attention of prosecutors who were investigating possible misuse of funds by the Trump Inaugural Committee. Michael Flynn, of course, has already pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI and has been cooperating with investigators. This is the first time that Devin Nunes' name has surfaced in any reports concerning the special prosecutor's investigation. And so Robert Mueller's investigation continues, and none of us really know exactly what he is investigating, who he is investigating, or how many different things and cases and episodes he is investigating, how many potential defendants still face some jeopardy as Robert Mueller continues his work. Is Devin Nunes now contemplating seeking immunity from the special prosecutor in exchange for telling everything he knows about possible Russian influence in the Trump campaign or the Trump transition or the Trump White House, or Russian influence over Donald Trump himself? Today, NBC's Kristen Welker asked the President of the United States the question that produced the answer that will follow Donald Trump for the rest of his life and beyond. It may turn out to be the most memorable line of the Trump presidency. It surely would be for any other presidency, but Donald Trump is so verbally explosive, we have no idea what's coming tomorrow. To put what the president said today in historical perspective, let's consider just for a moment how little most of us can remember of what presidents actually say. And I don't mean phrases like hope and change or shining city on a hill or 1,000 points of light. I mean full sentences. And the truth of it is that most of us usually cannot remember a single full sentence spoken by a president. I mean, Jimmy Carter. I can't remember a single full sentence he said. And that's not unusual. That's true for most presidents. So just an example, I will now recite for you every full sentence that I can remember a president saying since the dawn of mass media in the radio age, when the President of the United States first became a recognizable voice nationally through the magic of radio about 90 years ago. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I shall not seek and will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Ms. Lewinsky. That's all I can remember, word for word, in full sentences from the last 90 years of the American presidency. It's not about the eloquence of the president. We've had no more eloquent president than Barack Obama, but his sentences were not sound bites. And perhaps more importantly, Barack Obama was never at the center of a scandal or a collapsing presidency. And that's what produces some of our most memorable presidential lines, like President Lyndon Johnson announcing in 1968, as his presidency was drowning in anti-war protest, that he would not run for re-election. Johnson's party was deserting him then for 2 anti-war candidates, Gene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy. And so at the lowest point of his presidency, LBJ shocked us with that sentence that we did not expect and could never forget, that he was not going to run for re-election. Bill Clinton's most memorable quote comes from his reaction to part of the scandal that led to his impeachment in the House of Representatives. And the one line that I left out of that collection is the presidential line that was echoed today by Donald Trump. And it is the most memorable line of Richard Nixon's 5.5 years as President of the United States. And it comes from the heart of the scandal that led the House Judiciary Committee voting to bring articles of impeachment against President Nixon, and not long after that, President Nixon's resignation.
I'm not a crook.
I'm not a crook. Today's easy-to-remember presidential line came in response to an investigation which could lead to something we've seen before: the resignation of a president or the impeachment of a president. And it could possibly lead to something we've never seen before: the impeachment of a president in the House of Representatives and the conviction and removal of that president from office by the United States Senate.
I never worked for Russia.
In history, that line will have a longer life than Mexico will pay for the wall. Today, January 14th, 2019, will hold its spot in history as the first and only day on which a president of the United States has denied being an agent for a foreign government. That is what it's come to. This is the "I am not a crook" moment in the Trump presidency. That Nixon quote is important not just because it's so easily memorable, but because Richard Nixon was denying what became the essential accusation against him by a special prosecutor and the members of the House Judiciary Committee who voted to impeach him. And it turns out Richard Nixon was a crook. And that was the single most important thing you could know about Richard Nixon. And that is the space he occupies in history: our criminal president. When Richard Nixon said he was not a crook, we out there in the audience couldn't prove that he was. And so tonight, after hearing the President of the United States deny that he is now or ever has been a Russian agent, we don't know if it's true. We don't know what's true. But we do know that the history of presidents deep in scandal, denying the most damning accusation about them, is a history of presidents not telling the truth. Bill Clinton actually did do what he denied doing in his most famous quote. Richard Nixon actually was a crook. And so now we await Robert Mueller's answer to the question Kristen Welker asked today: have you ever worked for Russia, yes or no? That question came after a weekend of intense media coverage in reaction to a Friday night New York Times report that the FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation of the President of the United States because in the first months of the Trump presidency, after the firing of FBI Director James Comey, the FBI had then the very same question that Kristen Welker asked today: is the president a Russian agent? Shortly after the FBI opened that investigation, Robert Mueller was appointed special counsel to investigate, quote, any links and or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of President Donald Trump and any matters that arose or may arise directly from the investigation. And so tonight, Robert Mueller is working on the answer to that question: is the president a Russian agent? When Robert Mueller writes his report on his investigation, President Trump is hoping that Mueller will be handing that report to William Barr, who the president has nominated to be his next attorney general. William Barr's confirmation hearing begins tomorrow morning at 9:30. And in his prepared testimony released in writing today, William Barr says, I believe it is vitally important that the special counsel be allowed to complete his investigation. I have known Bob Mueller personally and professionally for 30 years. We worked closely together throughout my previous tenure at the Department of Justice under President Bush. We've been friends since. I have the utmost respect for Bob and his distinguished record of public service. When he was named special counsel, I said that his selection was good news and that knowing him, I had confidence he would handle the matter properly. I still have that confidence today. The country needs a credible resolution of these issues. If confirmed, I will not permit partisan politics, personal interests, or any other improper consideration to interfere with this or any other investigation. I will follow the special counsel regulations scrupulously and in good faith, and on my watch, Bob will be allowed to complete his work. Leading off our discussion now, Michael Isikoff, chief investigative correspondent for Yahoo News and the co-author of Russian Roulette. Ned Price is with us. He's a former CIA analyst and a former senior director and spokesperson for the National Security Council in the Obama administration. He's an MSNBC national security contributor. And Andrew Weiss, a Russia expert who has served on the staff of the National Security Council and also in the State Department during the Clinton administration. Michael Isikoff, I want to start with you. Having written the book Russian Roulette, you've been trying to get at these questions for literally for years now. You've come closer than most of us have have to answers here. I want to get your reaction to this reporting about the FBI's investigation of the president beginning sooner than we thought, and in effect sliding into and becoming part of the Mueller investigation.
You know, my reaction is it is time for Congress to step up to the plate and fulfill its constitutional responsibility and try to get answers. Look, we can spend weeks and months waiting for Bob Mueller to complete his investigation. I do think it's closer than you indicated in your opening, but I grant it, we don't know for sure. What I'm less sure about is that when Mueller does complete his investigation, we're going to instantly know the results in any meaningful form. We don't know what kind of report he's writing. It could be an expansive one. It could be a very limited one saying, I've charged these people. I haven't charged these other prospective defendants. We don't know how much of it will be publicly released. There could be a battle over executive privilege. There could be a battle. There's nothing in the regulations that requires public dissemination of this report. So the only people who can get answers to all the questions raised in that New York Times story and all the other stories we've been talking about for 2 years now is the Congress of the United States, with public hearings with key fact witnesses, and stop waiting for, some Mueller report that may or may not come anytime soon. We have an opportunity, February 7th, the first opportunity. Elliot Cummings is going to be questioning before the House Oversight Committee. Michael Cohen. All questions should be on the table, regardless of whether they get directly into his Mueller testimony. In fact, they should focus on his Mueller testimony, the Trump Tower meeting, the Ukrainian press plan, peace plan, everything else we've been talking about. It's the only way for us to finally get answers to all these questions, and it's really up to Congress now to step up and do its job.
And Ned, what Michael's describing is the way it worked during Watergate. The special prosecutor was working. The congressional investigative committees were working in the Senate, in the House. Even the impeachment hearings were going on in the House Judiciary Committee while the special prosecutor was still working.
That's absolutely right. Unfortunately, in this case, Lawrence, we have a very different model. We have endured a very different model, largely because of the individual you referenced at the top of your intro, and that's Devin Nunes. Devin Nunes ensured that at the outset of this administration, Congress, especially the House, would not be able to undertake a credible investigation because he turned it precisely into partisan warfare. Devin Nunes started as a member of the Trump transition team, and he never really relinquished that role during his time as chairman of the Intelligence Committee. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to benefit from that model in this presidency. Yes, we have the Senate Intelligence Committee. There's been a much greater degree of comedy between the chair and the ranking member of that committee. But one committee alone that itself is not a special committee around this one issue. It has a whole host of other oversight issues pertaining to the much broader panoply of intelligence activities and institutions, cannot get to the bottom of this alone. So for that reason, we've had to put a lot of stock in Bob Mueller. I agree with Michael. We don't know precisely what he will present us with, but I have no doubt that he will present Congress with, at the very least, an opening to continue the important work that is now moving forward in earnest, that we have a Democratic House and a House, importantly, with the power of the gavel and the power of the subpoena.
Later in this hour, we're going to hear from Eliot Engel, the new chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and he's announced that he wants to use his subpoena power and his investigative power in that committee to find out exactly what Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have been talking about, and he's trying to find different ways to find that out. But Andrew Weiss, that strikes me as an investigative mode that, although it seems like relatively normal oversight for that Foreign Affairs Committee to do, it also feeds the investigative process of what's going on here. And you've pointed out that there's a tremendous overlap of questions here in what Robert Mueller's investigating and what's emerged in this Washington Post reporting about the president trying to hide what he says to Vladimir Putin, what Vladimir Putin says to him.
Yeah, right now I think it's important for everyone to sort of focus on a key week of events, and that was during the period for Donald Trump's first face-to-face meeting with Vladimir Putin in Hamburg, Germany in summer of 2017. And what's remarkable about the chronology that is worth focusing on here is how this very first in-person encounter between the two leaders coincided with the scramble inside the White House and inside Trump's own family to respond to a breaking report in the New York Times that sort of was the first confirmed report of a high-level meeting between members of the Trump campaign and a Russian emissary. And what was remarkable is that after the first official bilateral meeting in the G20, Donald Trump went out of his way to seek out Vladimir Putin for an impromptu private session on the margins of a dinner event at the G20 summit. And we don't know what they talked about, but when Trump basically helped draft the statement for Don Jr., he emphasized that all the Russian lawyer had come to talk to people about was this horrible humanitarian situation where the Russian government had cut off American families' ability to adopt Russian orphans. We now know, of course, that that was just a smokescreen for what was going on, which was a Russian emissary saying, hey, I'm here to give dirt on your political opponents. And so Trump seems to have created this narrative of, oh, I'm really worried about Russian orphans. And then he was promptly embarrassed when that didn't hold up. But where I think we all are, struck by, based on Greg Miller's report over the weekend in the Washington Post, is this bizarre behavior of basically telling the translator, don't share any information about what you just witnessed, preventing the rest of the U.S. government from even knowing that this second meeting with Vladimir Putin had even happened. It was only about 10 days later that the White House basically came out and said, oh, yeah, by the way, we did this other meeting when we're just informing of it to you now, as if it wasn't meaningful. And then the final point, I'll conclude on this, was about 10 days later with the New York Times, Trump repeated this canard about adoption, pretending that that was the central aspect of why this Russian emissary had been received at Trump Tower by Don Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort. It doesn't add up.
And Michael, as Andrew just lined up there in the timeline, it is possible, in what Andrew was describing, that in his secret discussion with Vladimir Putin, where only the Russian translator was present at that dinner, that Donald Trump could have been getting his story straight with Vladimir Putin about what to tell the New York Times about the Trump Tower meeting before then getting the story straight with Donald Trump Jr. about what to tell the New York Times.
Interesting speculation for which we have no evidence. I think the timeline that Andrew outlined is intriguing, and I would add one more data point, something I reported like almost 2 years ago now, or at the time, which was that Trump's lawyers knew about the content of those of the emails that led to the Trump Tower meeting in late June of 2017. So it's about 2 or 3 weeks before the meeting with Putin, and when the White House acknowledged that Trump was aware of it. So, and it seemed improbable that Trump's lawyers would have these emails laying out exactly what the Trump Tower meeting was about or what it was supposed to be about, and not have informed their client. But all that said, I mean, look, you're going to have Eliot Engel up later. I come back to my point before. He's chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and he could subpoena the translators. Secretary Tillerson, then secretary, was there for parts of the meeting with Putin. He can be called to testify. There are ways to get at this without having to wait for Robert Mueller, who may or may not be able to answer the question. And just getting back to the point Ned made, Devin Nunes is no longer the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Adam Schiff is. And one of the more disheartening things I saw last week was a tweet from Adam Schiff saying that he wants to call Michael Cohen in closed session before the House Intelligence Committee. Really, at this point in the game, closed session behind closed doors? I mean, that just strikes me as completely off. getting back to my main point, the American public and Congress deserve answers to these questions, and let's stop waiting for Bob Mueller, who may or may not be able to answer them.
Michael Isikoff, Ned Price, Andrew Weiss, thank you all for starting us off tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.